Hi, this is Margaret Marsh with Civic, Nebraska, and I work on the voting rights team. And today we're going to talk a little bit about Asian American voting rights, the history involved. And I have a couple guests here who are going to join us in our conversation. I have Tishan, who is a community advocate, and Caleb, who is a student at University of Nebraska at Kearney. Thanks for joining me, guys.
Absolutely.
So we're going to start with the Naturalization Act of 1790, and this restricted citizenship to free white persons of good moral character. Racial minorities would be limited in their citizenship, their voting rights, their residency, jury participation, property ownership, and family rights. It read, be it enacted that any alien, being a free white person who shall have resided within the limits and under the jurisdiction of the United States for the term of 2 years, may be admitted to become a citizen thereof on application to any common law court of record in any one of the states wherein he shall have resided for the term of 1 year at least. And then we're going to move ahead just a little bit to talk about Chinese immigration in the 1800s. By 1851, there were 25,000 Chinese who came to California to look for gold and to work on the Central Pacific Railroad. Many of them also had businesses that offered services to people who worked in those industries. By 1880, 25% of California workers were Chinese. As a result of this, Congress passed the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882, and it read in part, be it enacted after the passage of this act, the coming of Chinese laborers to the United States be, and the same is hereby suspended, and during such suspension it shall not be lawful for any Chinese laborer to come, or having so come after the expiration of said 90 days to remain within the United States. The first Exclusion Act was slated to expire after 10 years, but that did not happen. The next major change we will see in voting rights for Asian Americans will come during World War II. There were a large number of Chinese Americans that were serving overseas, and so we did have change in our immigration policy at that point with the Magnuson Act on December 17th, 1944. 43, and it allowed 105 Chinese to enter per year. I'm not sure where they got the number. That seems a bit arbitrary, but there you have it. Our next big change in immigration policy would be in 1952 with the Immigration and Naturalization Act. It was drafted amid the paranoia of the Cold War. It established a preference system that determined which ethnic groups were desirable immigrants and placed great importance on labor qualifications. It also granted voting rights to Asian Americans for the first time. So this was a pretty major piece of legislation that occurred here. There were a lot of negative things associated with it, but one positive aspect was that we did have Asian Americans getting the vote for the first time in 1952. So the next big policy act that we have is the Immigration and Naturalization Act of 1965, which was signed by President Johnson on June 30th, 1968. And it abolished the nation's formula, which was excluding a lot of Asians from immigrating to the United States. So Tishan and Caleb, would you tell us a little bit about yourselves? And the big question for today is, what does voting mean to you?
Wonderful. I'll go ahead and go first. And thank you so much for having both of us on. This is a tremendous thing that you're doing, and I'm appreciative that you reached out and I can join this call. My name is Tishan Weerasooriya. I'm actually currently residing in Maryland. I do a lot of work in the community. I've been working on campaigns for the last 4 years. I was also a lobbyist for ACLU of Maryland, and then was also a chief of staff for a state senator here in Maryland. I currently also serve as the chair of the AAPI caucus of the Young Democrats of America. So I have a lot of familiarity with how having to reach out to individuals and kind of organize communities and things like that. To get back to the question, what does voting mean to me? To boil it down, voting to me means getting involved, having a voice at the table. I know a lot of you hear constantly that if you don't vote, then your opinion is not being heard and things like that. And coming from a government side where I used to be a lobbyist and chief of staff, voting means a lot. And when we were creating law and actually writing statutes and things like that, we would follow through and kind of see where voters were and how they voted kind of guided us on making those policies. And that's one thing I want to encourage all of you. I know sometimes in the AAPI community, getting involved in government and voting is not really looked fondly upon. I can speak, I'm a first generation immigrant as well. Both my parents came from Sri Lanka. And they don't really like to talk about politics. But one thing I try and get them to understand is that it is very important for individuals in our community to begin these conversations and get involved. And one thing I want to leave with each of you is that sometimes it can feel that you don't have a say and it just by voting doesn't mean that much, but it's critically important taking that first step and trying to move forward as you create new policies and talk to legislators about how to best influence your community and your family members and kind of what you want to see happen. So that's what voting means to me, is just getting involved and making sure your voice is heard. And that's one thing I want to leave with each of you, is to make sure that you guys do get involved and your voice is not too small. Margaret, anything else you would like me to cover?
No, thanks, Tishan, and I apologize for mispronouncing your name. I'm very
No worries.
for this to make sure I knew how to pronounce it, but yeah, and my brain cells just sort of evaporate there.
Oh, no worries.
Caleb, what does voting mean to you?
Hi, thanks, Margaret, and thanks for asking us to come on today and talk to you about voting and everything else. Voting is really important for me, and I think a lot in the Asian American community, because voting is an inherent right that is given to citizens of the United States, and it is one of the things that we can do as a citizen of the United States. And a lot of us are here because of, refugee status or strife that happened in Asia following the Second World War. And a lot of us are here, our parents are first or second generation immigrants themselves, often from that time period. And while they were being oppressed over there, now while they're here, they have a lot more freedoms, but they're still not yet quite into the culture of voting, and they're still not quite comfortable with it yet. There's a lot of negative connotations with rocking the boat, standing out, protesting, and things like that. But voting, at least on the other hand, is considered more tame, and that's something that we need to increase as a community. It's also something that gives us a voice directly in our own localities. One of the things that shocked me was when I was looking up different statistics for the town that I live in out here in rural Nebraska, the highest unemployment rate is actually in the Asian American community here. And that was not something that I expected to see. That's not something that really gets reflected very much in the news. And one of the ways that we can kind of address that and talk about it is to make sure that we have elected officials that we can then support. They can get into office and support our communities and figure out why do we have 3 times higher unemployment rate than most of the other minority populations, twice as high as the white population out here. Why is that happening, and then address that issue.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys. Thanks for joining me here today. So if you are interested in helping to protect voting rights, looking at some of these historical events, it's easy to think that voter suppression is something that America outgrew, but it is an ever-present threat to democracy. And we would love to have you join us and become a voting rights advocate to help work on these issues and make sure that voting remains something that's accessible to everyone. And we have a way to do that, which is really quick and simple. You can join our outreach circle. It is an online vehicle for you to take part in actions from the safety of your own home, so you don't have to worry about being out among people. You can still make a difference and help protect democracy. You just have to scan the QR code with your smartphone, or you can visit the link at the bottom of your page. And thank you for joining us today. And thank you to Sean, and thank you, Caleb.